we believe that any social movement that is not democratic cannot change anything. People need to feel empowered, especially in this capitalist society where people are atomized, people are alienated from each other. People need to feel that they have power to shape their own movement, shape their own campaign. And the months leading up to Paris is going to be a very, very hard fight. And I can guarantee you that fight will continue beyond Paris. But I think together we can create a joined up, bottom-up social movement that can end climate change. And what we need in the days and weeks that follow is for you guys, as many of you guys as possible, all of you guys in fact, to get engaged with This Changes Everything, get engaged with those working groups that you talked about in the last session. Okay, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. A bit of a change of schedule, doesn't really need much of an introduction, so I won't really bother. Please give it up for Russell Brand.
Thank you, Samir, for introducing me to this, well, it's a room, isn't it? It's not overcomplicated. It's a room that's owned by Quakers. It's a room that's become pyramid in shape and looks like it's concealing various Illuminati symbols, if we were to look big at. Oh, I want to know, what's the sign for Illuminati, just in case? Pyramid with an eye in it, thought so. So, I'm very happy to be here with you. We're all here for the same reason. We're here because we want change. We probably all have different priorities. We probably all have different ways in which we think that change should be achieved. I am a strong believer that each of us has a unique and individual connection with the divine. A kind of individual idea that's somewhat taken hold of our culture, the individualism of the post-war years, but has ultimately, its destination, turned us into passive consumers as opposed to active citizens, acting individually out of self-interest, animalistic desires, pride, selfishness, lust, as opposed to communal ideas, altruism, compassion. Francesca, my mate over there, asked me to come here today, and I kind of think that her brother Raoul maybe organised all this thing. Did you? Has people given you any appreciation for that yet? She seems to be one of those people I've picked up in life that's a pain in the arse. You know, like you get people in your life that make you do stuff. It's never the last time. This won't be the last time, will it? There'll be some other thing that I have to do soon for Francesca Martinez. But luckily for me, Francesca Martinez's needs align with my needs. And I think in spite of the fact that we increasingly in this day and age see ourselves as individuals, new narratives, new stories are about to emerge where we once again discover that our identity collectively is more important than our identity as individuals. This time of infatuation with self, I am really well qualified to talk on that subject. I feel qualified to speak on this subject not because I think I'm better than any of you, but because I know I'm worse. I'm an ultimate individualist. Narcissism was my religion, self-obsession, self-absorption, a product of my age, a product of Thatcher's Britain, of consumerism, of you make your own luck in this world, son. I'm from Essex. I was told that if I wanted anything, I had to go out and take it. I was told the most important things about me is what I am as an individual, what I can do as an individual, what I can achieve as an individual. And I bought that line, hook, line and sinker, and followed it all the way to Hollywood, pursuing materialistic, individualistic, glitter-covered, saccharine-soaked dreams. But having been there, having stepped through the looking glass, having held the illusion in my hand and seen only ashes when my palm reopened, I'm qualified to tell you that none of that stuff is real. None of that stuff is valuable. I'm reminded that not everyone was born with my gifts. This is something a friend of mine tells me. And what she means, she sort of says it sarcastically, this lady, because what she means is that I was born, I'm a drug addict. You know, so like for me, what is addiction other than consumerism plus? The belief that everything can be resolved with external acquisition, by imbibing, by consuming, by taking and taking and taking and taking. You know, and being an addict and being an addict in recovery has taught me that I can't become happy by consuming. I can't resolve inner issues with external solutions. I can only actually be happy peculiarly and antipathetically, in fact, by helping others. It was a difficult and confusing thing for me to discover when I was first forced to become altruistic for self-salvation. Helping others is the only thing that makes me feel that I am valuable, that makes me feel that I am connected. To a degree, we're here, aren't we, to a large degree, under the auspices of Naomi Klein's work, This Changes Everything, in which, as I understand it, Naomi said, you know, and I'm paraphrasing, I mean, what else do any of us do but paraphrase to our own ends? But what I took from that book, well, let's be honest, the back of that book, books are for writing, not reading. Garth Marenghi quote. I've actually written more books than I've read. Garth Marenghi quote. It's funny man. Is that the system isn't going to change things for us, because for the system, things are working. Exxon made $44 billion, or whatever it was last year. They don't need a revolution. For Exxon, things are kicking over cool. All is cosy on the Exxon front. So they ain't going to change nothing. My personal belief is, you know, that within the parameters of parliamentary democracy, very little is going to change, because these institutions, these organisations, these systems are set up and established to maintain order, not to facilitate change, and it acts as a kind of magical filter to inculcate change, to provide barriers to stasis, to provide barriers to change, to prevent genuine, true change happening. The good news, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as all of us are concerned, is that change begins within. That change comes about as a result, ultimately, of the will of the people. None of the ideas that I think, even though I'm always described as self-styled revolutionary, I think, I do have a stylist, not entirely self-styled. It's actually someone else who does that. Even though I'm often described as a revolutionary, for me it's not that radical. The things I believe in are democracy, a facility for the will of the people to be represented, so that the people that fought for us to have the right didn't fight in vain, so that we have the ability to influence the institutions that control us. And if we can't influence those institutions, then the institutions have to go. It's non-negotiable as far as I'm concerned. What I'm interested in is us finding new ways to cooperate, new ways to recognise that we all have the same struggle as one another, discarding the false narratives of difference, be they cultural, spiritual or religious differences, because there are several ultimate realities that I'm attuned to that seem important to me, is that we all share consciousness and awareness. We all know what it is to be a sentient, awake individual being, processing feelings, some which feel quite primal, some which feel acculturated and complicated. But we all know what it is to be aware, conscious, and I believe that consciousness is connected. A second indefatigable, irrefutable, sometimes I'm just winding up here, Simon. Incontrovertible. She's got, is there one song that's just like, fuck him, in depth? Whilst the signs and signifiers may vary, there is one ultimate reality with which we're all communicating. One of these irrefutable realities is that capitalism and conservation are directly opposed and on a collision course. You cannot have infinite growth if you want to protect resources. Capitalism, what does this mean? Russell, I've never loved anyone the way I love you. Until now, I didn't realise I was even gay. This whole conference, in my mind, is just an opportunity to meet you and to make you my husband. Kind regards, Samir. Samir! What a time to tell me! So me, I'm having a revolution anyway, because I've had a revolution in that I don't believe in consumerism anymore, I don't believe in capitalism anymore, I don't believe in senseless, relentless materialism and individualism anymore. The reason I could never be an atheist is because atheism for me, the end point of atheism is individualism, materialism. All that matters is all that can be weighed and held in your hand. And for me, the most important things are unknowable, the unknowable connections between all of us, regardless of what language you use to describe the infinite force from which we are all derived, the infinite energy to which we will all return, whether we see it in ecological terms. What were early religions but love of the earth, love of the planet, worship of the systems? I suppose what we need to do is find a way back to the essential nature of things, to embrace the divine feminine that is part of this planet, to embrace let's face it, that was a pickup line. I'm joking, spoonful of sugar, let's not take life too seriously. From the womb to the tomb, from the womb to the tomb. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Alright, mate. Have you sorted that T-tip thing out yet? Last time I saw you, you said you was going to sort it out. Almost there on the T-tip. Oh, thank God. So in America, you're allowed to put whatever you want in food, aren't you? Oh, we don't want that, I don't think. That doesn't seem good. Doesn't seem good, the idea that private corporate courts would be set up that we'd have no control over. That doesn't seem like it'd be a positive thing. Can we trust them? Big transnational corporations? Of course we can, they're fine. Don't worry, capitalism will ultimately resolve itself. No, in a way, we've much to be grateful for capitalism. It has provided the organisms of the revolution. It has provided us with media. It's provided us with transport. And there's nothing wrong with dressing nice. There's nothing wrong with media as a concept. There's nothing wrong with nice clothes. There's nothing wrong with I promise to pay the bearer. What's wrong is the head of the serpent. The head of the serpent. The idea that everything is for profit, that everything has a dollar sign or a pound note written on it. The invisible nature of capitalism, all-encompassing capitalism, without opposition, without alternative, so that we dream in capitalism now, that we can't see any alternative. It's up to us, to in whatever language we speak, in whatever terms we see it, to come together and recognise that we have only one opponent. There are only about 85 people in the world that are benefiting from things being the way they are, and those are the people that tell you that the way things are is the only way that things can be, that somehow they have happened upon the only workable system. Capitalism doesn't even tell you that it's good. It admits that it's shit, but it says that it's either this, or Stalinism, or beheadings in a desert. Well, there are myriad alternatives. We can create whatever world we want. We can imagine new realms and pull them down together. So, I think what I'm going to do now is I might go on that anti-Rupert Murdoch thing. Come down to, what I believe in is localised action and globalised ideology. I've got a lovely new cafe thing. We've got a cafe. That we started on the New Era estate in N1. Pop down there. It's like a social enterprise. The people are running it collectively. Recovering drug addicts are working in the place. They're going through coffee like fucking maniacs. It's hell. It's absolutely ridiculous. We have taken over the awning of a Sun newspaper and put True News, my online media account, and the Sun are rattled. These tiny little symbols, these things that you wouldn't think matter, they take a personal interest because it's held together with lies. It's held together with our inaction. And it can fall apart whenever we choose to tear it apart. And I don't like to focus on the aggressive aspect, but for me, this thing is inevitable. It's happening. I have no fear. I live in total, absolute certainty that we have already lived out our destiny. I'm going to go on a date with Samir now. I've been told to recommend that Occupy march. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to go. I might need to go to an NA meeting. I'm feeling pretty freaked out. But if I don't go, I'm going to go to that Occupy Rupert Murdoch thing. Samir will give you some details. I love you all very much, and that's the most important thing, isn't it? Thank you.
Okay. Outed by Russell Brand at a climate conference. That's a sentence I never thought I'd say. Okay, well, our next speaker is the co-founder of a powerful social movement embedded in indigenous communities in Canada. It came about it's called Idle No More, and it came as a reaction to a piece of right-wing legislation in 2012 set forth by the Harper government, which paved the way for the mining of tar sands and the building of a pipe from Alberta to the Pacific coast, carrying that dirty energy, bitumen, which would destroy the water and the land in that area. And as the environmentalist James Hansen said, the burning of high quantities of bitumen spells the end for the climate. So Idle No More really are at the cutting edge of resistance to climate change. Now, I don't know if she's on Skype or... Skype? No, okay. We had hoped to have her on Skype. The technology doesn't seem to work, so we've got a pre-recorded message, I think. No, we haven't got that either. Have we got anything from... Okay, Sylvia McAdam will come on later. Okay, well, let's move on to the next one. It's not going well, is it? Okay, well, our next speaker... let me refer to something Naomi Klein said in her book. She said that social movements and the labour movement need to link up because the labour movement have a mass base, they have organisational skills, they have access to resources and infrastructure. So it is a tactic of fighting climate change to link up with workers. What was noticeable to me and to I think many other people was the absence of a coherent labour movement on the 21st of September last year, which is why I'm delighted that the leader of one of the most radical trade unions in the country, PCS, is here to speak to us. Please give a warm welcome to Mark Serwotka.
Thanks very much. A short straw going on after Russell Brand, but I'll try my best. Can I say I'm delighted to be here, and also other leaders of my union are here. Chris Boff, who's led for our union on environmental work, and has really put PCS at the forefront in the trade union movement of wanting to link up with the environmental movement. And that's part of our commitment, and so I'm really pleased that the unions were able to get to speak today, and I wanted to also add my congratulations to the organisers of what has clearly been a fabulous event. And what I want to do very briefly is to make the case as to why the trade union movement and the environmental movement should be together like hand in glove, that we should be allies. We should watch out for those who try to divide us and try to argue that to get their way, if they get us at each other's throats, it makes life easier for them and worse for us. So we should be absolutely natural allies. And that means, I think, by starting to recognise that under capitalism, capitalism attacks workers who are members of trade unions, and it attacks the environment. For us at the moment, we're dealing with tens of thousands of people being laid off. Living standards have dropped at a faster rate than any time since Queen Victoria. And for the environmental movement, we see lack of investment in renewals, in public transport. Pollution seems to be something that capitalists can get away with willy-nilly. So we have to say we can join up and actually make common arguments as to why we can defend people, working class people, people in the labour movement, and we can be part of a radical environmental movement that can see us take things forward. So let me say right from the outset that, conscious as we are in our union, that there is a debate around the issue of growth and degrowth and steady state. From our position in PCS, we say this about growth. We're agnostic about growth in this sense. Growth for capitalists is about quantity. It is about measuring economic activity, and they wish to see the economy expand. For us, growth should be about quality. What do I mean by that? In the last 2 years, allegedly the economy has grown in every single quarter. Yet we have millions relying on food banks. We have a homelessness crisis. We have people who need houses, and we're not building houses. So there's been growth for capitalists, but for us, it has been absolutely going backwards. Similarly, in terms of the environment, what we see is that capitalists continue to make their profits. Russell mentioned XCOM, and these people do not care about the effect they have on the environment in any part of the world. So we've got to come together and say what we want is growth that actually is good for the environment and is good for people. So why don't we say, for example, here in the UK, if we built hundreds of thousands of houses, environmentally friendly houses, by the way, to the highest standard, if we invested in public transport, if we invested in renewables, what we could see is 1 million climate jobs, people being put back to work, who will pay taxes that will help us buy the things that this country so desperately needs, and we would see massive reductions in our carbon emissions. Now, it seems to me that is a win-win. People are back to work, we can share in some of the prosperity, and the environment wins as well. And that's what we've got to say. For us, the slogan, 1 million climate jobs, is what should unite the trade union movement and the environmental movement. But that means in the unions, we have got to confront some of the things that we found difficult in the past years, where we see some unions who believe that the interests of their members mean they have to stay quiet, or even in some cases take the wrong position on things that affect the environment. And let me say something about my own union. In my own union, we represent people in the aviation industry, we used to represent people in the nuclear industry, and we represent people in the Ministry of Defence. And yet, as a union, we have a position of total opposition to nuclear power, we have a position against the expansion at Heathrow, and we have a position of opposition to all nuclear weapons, and indeed we are affiliated to CND. Now, the question, therefore, you might ask yourself is, how did we do that? Did we ignore the members? Did we keep quiet about it? Is it a secret that's on page 106 of our annual report? Absolutely not. What we did is we went to the members who worked in these industries. In the nuclear industry, in defence, we wrote to every single person that we represented, and we argued that if we did not renew Trident, if we did not have nuclear weapons, if we freed up the billions and billions of pounds to do something productive, they could be re-employed, re-skilled to do things that would benefit all of us. And do you know what? The members actually accepted it. Do you know what? At Heathrow, while many unions have taken the view there's jobs to be had by expanding Heathrow, our view has been very, very simple. The expansion at Heathrow is not in the interests of people or the environment, and we should oppose it. And that is what we've done. So this tells us, even in the trade union movement, you can confront some of these difficult issues, you can turn them round and say, we can all benefit. So I want to finish, therefore, by saying, what does this mean in practice? In practice, I think the union movement must be much, much more involved in the environmental movement. It means we've got to understand the importance of direct action, and it means we've got to understand that one person's demands does not mean it's to the detriment of a worker somewhere else if we can all unite to make common cause. And I'll give you a real example of where I've seen this in the most inspirational way recently. Our members working for the National Gallery, the second most visited tourist attraction in the UK, yesterday finished their 17th day of strike action against privatisation. Now these low-paid workers, whose representatives today have said they want to vote to escalate that to an indefinite strike, are fighting to keep the private corporations out of our arts and culture sector. And do you know what happened when the strike started? A group called Art Not Oil, people who recognised that having all these exhibitions sponsored by Shell came down, took direct action, and it was fabulous. Because what it showed is the workers inside are on strike, and the people protesting against Shell made common cause and actually said, we don't want any of the polluters' money in our culture sector. These should be public assets that are publicly owned. That's a glimpse of what that direct action can mean, to support workers on strike and to make a wider point. So I'll finish by saying this. If we can take that forward as our blueprint, if we recognise that capitalists want to divide us, then we won't fall for the playing off the public sector or the private sector, young people against pensioners, people who are migrants against those people born in the UK. And we will not fall for the lie that says if you're pro-environmental issues, you are against the interests of workers. If we unite on all of that, If we get on each other's demonstrations, if we all come to the People's Assembly demonstration against austerity on the 20th of June, we can rock them to their core. That's what my union wants to see. That's what I'm sure all of you want to see. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, so the workshops were pretty experimental. As you were coming up with ideas and action points, you'll remember they were being noted down by a consensus builder. That was happening in 11 workshops. What I certainly didn't say to my workshop is that all 11 sets of notes were being sent to one single person who was trying to consolidate it all and turn it into kind of a coherent set of working groups and action points that reflects the proceedings of these workshops. I'm now going to introduce Dan, who has been that person consolidating it all. He's been an absolutely inspiring organizer of this. This event would not have happened for Dan. He is the single most important person in the room. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming down today, for participating in those workshops so well. What I'm going to try to do here is basically try and sum up what 11 different workshops said. There was these consensus builders in every single workshop trying to kind of dissect what were the core emphases that came out of each individual workshop. And I've tried to put them together because basically what's quite interesting is that everyone's hitting on the same points. We're talking about very similar things. There were a lot of thoughts about the movement as a whole, what we need to do together, essentially, to make the mass movement that we need. The first point was about bringing it all together. We really have to start integrating our struggles and stop being, as I said, we need to be less precious about our own individual struggles, start integrating all our different single issue campaigns and try to think about how we try and work together. The second point was about inclusion, that we need to change everything, we need everyone. So many times on the left, there's this kind of appetite for always being on the left of someone, for always trying to be in the position of critique, of opposition. But I think there was a big emphasis in the workshop that we need to be far more inclusive, reaching out to people that might not even identify as leftists, as socialists, going beyond jargon, going beyond names, and reaching out to communities that traditionally aren't represented in the climate movement and the anti-austerity movement. Another good point was the idea of, oh, okay, thank you. Another good idea was a lot of people kept talking about fun and creativity, that political movements are traditionally so boring, and there's this kind of often this fetishizing of being constantly out on the streets, being constantly radical and engaging in struggle, which is long and laborious. And so there's a lot of interesting ideas about how we can make the movement more fun and accessible, and that way we'll make it a movement that could involve everyone. And finally, there's lots of great points about diversity across all the different plenary sessions. Someone made a really amazing point about embedding diversity into the movements, not just doing outreach work to particular groups, but actually putting those groups inside the organizing groups, inside the organizing committees of events like these, of the movements themselves. Next slide, John. There was also a lot of talks about where are our key fights, where can we win, what are the issues that we need to fight on. And essentially here they are. Energy is one of them, a lot of talk about pushing for a fossil-free UK, lots of talk about working on fuel poverty, lots of talk about 100% community renewable energy. Food was a really big issue, everything from waste to sustainable agriculture. A lot of talk about health, going on from air pollution and emphasizing a narrative that's accessible to people, that climate change is very deeply related to our health as well, but also going on to defending the NHS. A lot of talk about homelessness, supporting occupations going around all over the UK. A big talk about media, about opposing the corporate media, creating our own narrative and our own stories of social change. Lots of talk about jobs, as Mark Serwotka so eloquently talked about just now. A big discussion of climate debt and the international dimensions of climate change. Lots of interesting discussion as well about our borders, about the militarizations of Europe borders, and trying to do things that show solidarity with the thousands of people who have needlessly died in the Mediterranean. And then a lot of talk about democracy, about opposing political corruption and opposing the corporate takeover of public services. Then there were a lot of discussions about how we build up our power, a lot of emphasis that we need to work with local communities and emphasize on community struggle, that we need to be out there showing our solidarity with all sorts of struggle, and only by doing this we can actually try and build up the joined-up movement that we need. We had a lot of talk about media, creating our own narrative and our own stories. We need a positive narrative when it comes to facing out to the rest of society. We need a narrative that emphasizes that we want a more beautiful world, not that just we're opposing things all the time. And the really, really interesting conversations about language as well, about creating a more inclusive and accessible language that's relevant to all people and stops talking in academic or jargonistic frameworks. And the idea of a lot of people talked about simplifying, clarifying, and visualizing the ideas that we have for a more beautiful world. And the final point as well, we need to be more broad and open, reaching out to school children, to unities, to people of color, all across the spectrum. And then the final slide is what happens next. And there are all sorts of really interesting ideas about what should come next for a kind of a mass movement of climate and social justice. The key ones, I think, is that we have to take a multi-issue focus to the next level. It has to be a mainstream idea. We've got a huge turnout today, but still we need to take this to another level in terms of the way people think about the crises we face. Second point is we need to have a more positive focus. We can't just be seen to be anti-things all the time. We have to be showing people what our vision was. We had a great plenary session today on vision that hopefully illustrated some of those things. Third thing is that we need to create joined-up actions that allow for our movements to thrive together and to coexist without hijacking each other, without displacing each other. We talked about the Day of Dissent, and there was a lot of interesting and positive feedback on that idea, but essentially how can we create actions that allow for us to join together, allow for us to show our diversity, but also show our unity. Final 2 points, spaces for us to learn from each other. Today was an example of this. We all learned from each other, young and old. Everyone had very interesting insights and very interesting contributions. We need to create more of these on a community level, but also on a bigger scale like this. And finally, we should try and create tools and online networks that allow us to join together, find out about actions, and be more aware of the great work that everyone's doing. So that's more or less a really, really quick, hopefully accurate reflection of what came out of today. Thank you very much.
Is Sylvia McAdam coming? Okay, well, so apparently, sadly, Sylvia McAdam from Idle No More won't be on the screen, but at least I gave her a big up, so that's good. Okay, thanks for that, Dan. Our next speaker is an activist, is a comedian, has been one of the leading faces of the People's Assembly Against Austerity. You may have seen if you came to that big conference back in June 2013, and has been a driving force for This Changes Everything. Like Dan, I don't think this event would have happened without her, and I'm very honored to call her a friend. Please give a warm welcome to Francesca Martinez.
Wow. Hello. Hello. It's such an honor to be here. I'm going from an idea in our heads to this. It's really humbling. Thank you for coming. I would say, brilliant points have been made today. I don't want to repeat them. I'd like to say that I think a key part of social change is to challenge the toxic ideas that disempower people and strip them of their confidence and their belief that change is possible. I think climate change is a physical manifestation of these disgusting ideals. These ideals of greed, of individualism, of materialism. They are literally killing the planet, and they are also creating mass suffering. I, for one, think ideas can change the way we live. The ideas can shape the world we live in. And I think if we are to create a mass movement, we've got to engage people with new and beautiful ideas. We've got to reconnect them to each other. And we've got to reconnect them to what it means to be human. Now, ideas changed my life. How I saw myself dictated how I related to the world. And I went through a period of feeling very abnormal, and faulty and insecure. The world made me feel that I was a mistake, that I was abnormal, a freak. And when I felt like that, I didn't have any energy or focus for anything else. But what happened is one day I woke up and I realised, hang on a minute, I've never met a normal person. They don't exist. I'm Francesca and I'm perfectly me and I'm wobbly and that's the way I'm meant to be. And that shift of perspective was a profound moment for me because it made me concentrate on how lucky I was, and it also was a profound political awakening because I realised all my insecurities had nothing to do with being wobbly and everything to do with living in a culture that breeds dissatisfaction and depression. So, now, these disgusting ideals and these superficial values that are promoted so heavily, they aren't an accident. They are a clear ploy to depoliticize people. Because the first step to creating a better world is to believe in one. And if you don't have the time or energy to think about anything other than the thigh gap, or whether you're going bald, or what brand of phone you have, you're not going to put that energy into things that matter. So I think it's really important that we realise that the personal relationships with ourselves is absolutely vital. Consumerism thrives on us, billions of people creating pointless junk, and then billions of us consuming that pointless junk. And for it to work, for that deadly cycle to keep going, enough of us have to believe that we're not good enough as we are, so that we'll go out and buy shit we don't need. That's it. So it's really vital to realise that accepting yourself as you are is an act of civil disobedience. I'll just finish by saying, you know, every human right that we enjoy today was fought for by people who focus outwards, not inwards. So being happy as you are right now really is a political act. And what I take so much from Naomi's book is that she's made climate change inspiring for me, because before it was a really daunting, scary, overwhelming problem that I felt helpless about. But her framing of it has made me feel that actually we can use climate change as an opportunity to create a better world, one that isn't built on consuming never-ending bits of materialism that don't make any of us feel happier. So I think it's just so inspiring to realise that what she's proposing is a reconnection to values that really matter to each other and to the planet. And I think that if we can love ourselves more, then it's much more likely we'll love each other more and this beautiful planet. before I go, I just have to say a huge thank to Dan, Maya and Caitlin, who have done the work of 20 full-timers. And I really want everyone to give them a huge round of applause. And finally, I just want to say, it took us billions of years to get here. And, billions of scientific miracles had to occur for us to exist right now. We've won the lottery of life. And life is such a beautiful, precious gift. And we have to fight for it because, as far as we know, we're the only living things in the universe. So it's our duty to protect it. Thank you.
Before I bring on our... Thank you, Francesca. That was amazing, like usual. Before I bring on our last speaker, who's going to take us out and say the last words, just two quick points. I had a most excellent suggestion from someone in the audience. I can't remember who she is. Someone who's come here from Oxford, who feels inspired by the day and wants to make links with other people from Oxford who are here today. Can I get a show of hands who is not from London here? Okay. And who of you would like to link up with people who've been to TCE? Okay, great. Now what I suggest is that you guys not from London, there's an empty room across the corridor. After our last speech, can I suggest you have a quick exchange of contact details, and we can go for a drink afterwards and we can talk about it, okay? Cool. And the second quick point, just to echo something that Russell Brand said, just to flag up a demonstration, the mini shard, Murdoch's headquarters, is currently being occupied. If you still have any energy left in you, I suggest you march down to that after you've been to that room, if that applies to you, and show solidarity to that occupation. Cool. So that leaves the last speaker, who is yet another person who was a driving force behind today, and the event might not have happened without him. A very, very, very experienced activist who works for Friends of the Earth, very radical, and basically a very good bloke, and I'm very glad that he's going to be sending us out. Please give a warm welcome to Asad Rehman.
That's good. So, thank you. And what an absolutely amazing day it's been incredible. The speakers that we've heard, John, Russell, Naomi, Nemo from Nigeria, Liddy from the Philippines, Kate, I mean, the issues that have been raised, and then the discussions in the workshops. I sat through a couple of the workshops, and actually the discussions were incredible. They were really deep. People actually starting to think, how do we connect our different fights? How do we make the struggle a more unified struggle? How do we build more power? So I think it's been an absolutely incredible start. And like everybody else, I really do want to say that, particularly for Daniel and Maya, I think they were two of the people who were most responsible for putting this on. And it's an incredible, incredible achievement for both of them. And also to the other organisers, there's a huge amount of individuals. There was lots of people from Brick Lane debates, from Occupy, from the Young Greens, from Friends of the Earth, who came together to put this on because we think it was needed. It was needed because there was clearly a demand from in our own campaigns and our own movements for a space for us to be able to come together and have these conversations. Because we all know we are at a moment of crisis. You heard this morning from the Tyndall Centre, we're on a pathway to a warming of 4 to 5 degrees. And that's not just us saying as radicals. The World Bank, that most revolutionary of institutions, is talking about that if the current pathways continue, by the end of the century, the planet will only be able to hold and sustain 1 billion people, and that in a very precarious situation. That's the reality of what we're facing, the life and death for billions of people. We have a financial crisis, but we found $9 trillion to bail out the banks, and yet it's the poor, it's the elderly, it's the sick, it's the young, who are paying the price of the attack on austerity, for the austerity attack. We're seeing a political crisis where our corporations actually have now more power than our governments, but they want even more power. They're trying to push through trade deals, which will make it impossible for us as citizens to ever make any decisions about how we want to produce, consume, or build our societies. We live in a world where 2 billion people don't have access to electricity. 1 billion people don't have any access to fresh water. Where even in this country, 30,000 people die because of fuel poverty. We live in a world where the United States, with 5% of the world's population, has an average per capita income of over $40,000. And is responsible for nearly 50% of historical emissions in the world. But then, on the other hand, we have a country like India, which has got 18% of the world's population, where the average per capita income is only $3,000. And they're responsible for 0.01% of historical emissions. We live in an unequal world. We live in a time of crisis, of planetary crisis, and of multiple crises. And you know what the response from the United States was? And it really struck me. I work at the climate negotiations by the lead US negotiator, Todd Stern, and he said, the one thing that's not up for negotiation is the American way of life. And I liked the fact that he was so honest, because actually those people who think that the climate negotiations are about an environmental negotiation, they're not. They're about a political negotiation. They're about an economic negotiation. They're about who lives and who dies, who has power and who doesn't have power. And we see the reality around the world. We see the resource wars. We see what happened in devastation to Iraq and now in Libya and in Syria. We also see that our own activists are under attack all around the world. In December, I was in Lima in Peru at the negotiations, and I spent some time with the family of Edwin Chota, who is an indigenous leader. Him and 3 indigenous other leaders were murdered by guards from the logging company because they were defending their indigenous homelands from the logging and extractive industry. And last week, I was at a Friends of the Earth meeting where I was sharing a discussion with Negus, the chair of Friends of the Earth Indonesia, and he was telling me about one of their young activists. His name was Nick Kareem, who was with another farmer activist, young farmer activist, 22 years old, Indra Palani, who's been campaigning against land grabs from the Asia Pulp company when they were attacked by the guards, and Indra Palani was killed. And every week around the world, we're seeing now 3 to 4 environmental defenders being killed all around the world. And these are environmental defenders. They're not human rights defenders. They're not defenders of other things. We as a movement are also under attack. But I also know that the reality of the world that's out there, And as an anti-racist, you know, I look at what's happening, and you see every week the pictures in the Mediterranean of the boats with migrants floating. Last year they said over 3,000 people drowned in the Mediterranean trying to flee these resource wars. And you know what the response of the United Kingdom government is, our government? It was, let's cut the funding to the rescue boats, because the rescue boats encourages people. Well, I'll tell you what encourages people. It's our wars. It's our desire and our grab for resources which encourages migration. It's what drives migration. There are now more people migrating. 1 in 7 of the world's population is a migrant now. There are more people being forced out of their homes and their livelihoods because of climate change than even war and conflict. The consequence of the crisis that we face is absolutely incredible. The challenge is immense. But those people who think that this fight can be won in this week or next week or in a year or 2 years, then you're in the wrong fight. You're in the wrong movement. Because this is going to be a long fight. It's going to be a fight not just for power, but it's actually a fight not just for who lives and dies. It's a fight for what kind of world do we want. Do we want a peaceful world? Do we want a more equitable world? Do we want a more sustainable world? It's actually a challenge to everything and everybody who's got a stake in keeping business as usual. And that is an immense challenge. But we're not alone. Really, we're not alone. Yesterday, I was in Tunis at the World Social Forum. And many of the discussions I heard here today were the discussions that were going on there as well. The discussions about the crisis, about how do we campaign, how do we connect, what's our vision, how do we keep hope, how do we talk about our struggles. And I'll tell you, you wouldn't be surprised in Tunisia, but in the pouring, pouring rain, you know, I stood with Tunisians, Palestinians, Libyans and Algerians. I stood with Bangladeshi farmers from Via Campesina, with Afro-Brazilian migrants and other migrants groups. I stood with dirty energy campaigners from Nigeria and even from the UK. And we stood outside Bardo Museum, where last week ISIS sympathizers gunned down visitors to that museum. And I was talking to one of the young Tunisian activists called Laura, and I was saying, you know, how are you keeping yourself going? She said, we have no choice. This is not a choice. This is a struggle. We're in a fight against the right-wing jihadis, but we're also in a struggle against the right-wing neocons as well. We're in a struggle against neoliberal capitalism. It's not a choice we're making. It's a choice we have to do. We have to be engaged in this fight because we're fighting not just for ourselves and our families, we're fighting for our communities and for our people and our futures. And I tell you, when I stood during the World Social Forum and I stood talking and listening to people about their campaigns around land grabs or corporate power, when I stood and heard people about how they are fighting, incredible fights, you know what? Not only are they fighting, they're actually winning. They're really fighting and winning, and we should remember that, and we should celebrate that as well, that we do have some power. That communities, even in this country, the fact that Scotland's got a moratorium on fracking, that Wales has got a moratorium on fracking, it's not happening in abstract. It happened because local people, local communities organised. They forced decision makers to hear their voice, and that's happening around the world. But we also know but I don't want to sugarcoat it, because we're also fighting and we're losing. But that's not a problem in itself, because you have to understand who we're fighting. And when you understand who we're fighting, then you understand that this is going to be a struggle and a fight where not only we're going to have victories, there are going to be defeats. There are going to be many, many defeats. But we've got to use the defeats to consolidate, to rebuild, to re-strengthen it, to look again at how we fight this struggle, to look at what are our tactics, what are our strategies, how can we build more power? And friends, that is the key question. How do we build more power to win? How do we build the more movement building? What does movement building actually mean? And that's not just about, oh, let's just cobble together a few campaigns and say that was it. Or if I go on a few different demonstrations, that's it, I'm part of the movement. No. Movement building is something much more deeper. It's about connecting our fights. It's about identifying who our common enemies are. It's about looking, how do we pool our resources? How do we amplify and echo our voices? How do we make sure our demands are concrete, are connected to where people are? And how do we make sure that we can build sufficient power? Because it's no good just fighting and thinking, well, I fought and that was it. We want to fight, but we want to win as well. And friends, we need to, in that fight, absolutely, as Dan said, I heard so much of this in the workshops, we need a diverse movement. We really do. But you can't build. We can't win without a diverse movement. We can't. I was struck by, because I actually stood on the same platform in the old building on the launch of the Stop the War Coalition. And in that Stop the War Coalition, it was us, black organisations, anti-racist organisations, that demanded that the anti-war movement have as one of its three demands, not just stop the war, it had as its demands, say no to racist attacks and defend civil liberties. We are the ones that demanded that because we said that the anti-war movement, the peace movement, before that was white. It didn't engage and connect with our communities. And now look, we have an anti-war movement that is probably the most diverse movement, diverse political campaign that there's been in this country. And out of that, we've politicised hundreds and hundreds of young people who've gone and built and connected with many of the campaigns. And it's absolutely right, we have to have an issue about our language. I'm from the left, I make no bones about it. But you know what? The left, when they talk to each other, bore the pants off me. If you want to sit and talk to each other, if you want to read arcane books and quote things to each other, that's all fine and well. But I'm not interested in that. I want a language that connects with where people are, connects with where my communities are. I wanted a language that recognises that power doesn't lie with those people. It lies out there. It lies out there in our communities, in our workplaces, in our homes. And those are the people we need to connect with. And that's why we need real concrete demands. The people's demands. Demands around energy. Around stopping dirty energy. And in this country, that means stopping fracking. That means saying no way, in no place, in not a single inch of this country, will we allow fracking to take place. It also means we can't fight against dirty energy without fighting against fuel poverty. That fuel poverty is the way in which we connect with our social justice movements. That they are the twin side. That we also need to have a vision, the decentralised community energy vision. A vision where we own energy, we control energy, we produce energy, and we decide how much we want to consume. Not our private corporations, not the corporations that are banking billions and billions each year. We need demands that connect with where people are and what people understand. That means demands around food. It means demands around justice. It means demands around democracy. And only then do we begin to build the movement that we are. And as Samir said, you know, this event has been really important, not because it's told us anything new, because we all know that these are the different fights and the different dimensions. But what we've tried to do here and what I've been inspired by, totally inspired by the young people involved in Brick Lane's debates within Occupies, the new way in which they're organising, new way to be inclusive, to be participatory, to actually say power lies with us as people, to make the decisions, to concretise what the demands and the tactics have been. And that's why we've had some really good consensus building. We've had a lot of really great ideas, things that we need to think about, things about how do we harness the positive energy in this room? How do we break out of the silos of our individual campaigns? Friends, this is not an end. This is just the beginning of a journey. It's the beginning of a journey for all of us. We can be part of the solution. We're not the only solution. There are many, many other campaigns and people out there fighting. And we have to recognise that, and recognise and learn from each other and strengthen. But someone once said, you know, united we stand, divided we fall. And that is so true of our movement at the moment. And what this movement, and why I'm so inspired at the moment, and I'm so hopeful, is because actually when I look around this room, I see new people. I see young people. I actually see more diverse people. I see more black people in this room than I've seen environment movements before. And that gives me hope. It gives me hope that we can actually build a red-green movement. A movement that sees itself connected. Actually, let me correct that. A red-green-black movement. Yeah. But for that, you know, we need to win the battle of ideas. That's absolutely true. We need to win the battle of the narrative. We need to look at how we're organised. We need to look and learn from how we can struggle and how we can win. On my t-shirt, it says, mobilise, resist, transform. And I really believe those are fundamental principles of all of our social movements all around the world. They go back through hundreds and hundreds of years. They're what brought us the right to vote, to form the trade unions, to end slavery, to end colonialism, imperialism, that will one day liberate Palestine. These are the words that will be the foundation on which our movements are built. And that's why we've got to build a local to global movement. But I was struck, and there's a quote, and one of my favourite quotes from an Indigenous Australian activist called Leela Watson, who said, if you're coming here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And that should be the foundation of how we build a local to global movement. Friends, I'm wrapping up, but we're in a critical year. We're in the road to Paris. There's going to be a lot of media attention this year about the climate negotiations. Look, Paris is going to be a disaster, we know that. It's not going to save us. But don't be disheartened about that, because actually it's the fight towards Paris that is going to be important. It's about how we escalate our movement towards Paris and beyond. That means that we have to look at what are the new dates that are coming up. That means looking at the Day of Dissent on April 18th and making sure that we build a very powerful set of people, actions and organisations willing to take direct action, willing to take all forms of different action against the corporate free trade agreements. It means taking and isolating and exposing the actions of the G7 in June. It means coordinating around this country in October, a global day as part of the global day against dirty energy on October 9th, 10th. But it also means that we have to show our real strength in November, in this country, before our governments go to the climate negotiations, to say, here are our people's demands. Here are what we are telling you we want. Because we know you're going to fail, but we're telling you. And when you return, it's not you we'll be looking to, it's ourselves that we'll be looking to. And what we will have to do in this country, we will have to make sure that not a single barrel of oil comes out of the North Sea, not a single cube of gas comes out in terms of fracking, and not a single ton of coal comes out of our ground, because that's our responsibility to the rest of the world. Friends, this, to be honest, doesn't change anything. You change everything. In fact, we change everything, and that is what we've got to build. Friends, I'm really honoured to be part of this movement, to be part with you, and I think what we've got to do now, right, really is stand up. Stand up, everybody here. Because I actually want you to turn to the people next to you. Turn to them. Shake their hands, make the connection, because you are the movement. This is the movement we're building. This is the struggle, and this is how we'll win. Thank you.